Many years ago, there was a young musician who was slowly but surely going deaf. He realized that he would soon be unable to hear any music whatsoever, his own or anyone else's. He wrote in his will, "As the autumn leaves fall and wither, likewise all my hopes have been destroyed." For Ludwig van Beethoven, at the age of 30, there seemed to be no reason to go on living. If Beethoven's life had ended at that point, the cultural riches of the world would be greatly diminished, and Beethoven himself would have forfeited the great triumphs that awaited him. But he, of course, did find the resiliency to go on living, and 23 years later, his Ninth Symphony included lines from a poem called Ode to Joy. In all of Western classical music, there's no composition that more emphatically celebrates love of life and deep affection for all of humanity. Somewhere between the despair of his early years and the great achievements of his maturity, Beethoven discovered emotional strength and physical endurance beyond anything he could have anticipated. There's no doubt in my mind that you have the same inner strength, for every one of us has it. But if you're like most people, there may be times when you've doubted this internal power. In fact, right now, you may feel like there are situations in your life that are just as overwhelming. You may feel that your problems are even worse than Beethoven's. And anyway, he was an extraordinary person who had great talent to fall back on. History provides us with many stories of gifted men and women who overcame difficulties, but it's not always easy to identify with such obviously unique individuals. Well, let's look back at another example of personal resiliency on the part of a very different kind of person. But first, let me explain where this example comes from. Probably the most valuable study ever done on personal resiliency was undertaken in the Hawaiian Islands on the island of Kauai by two researchers named Emily Werner and Ruth Smith. This study, which followed more than 450 men from childhood through their adult lives, was an attempt to learn why some people are able to overcome severe disadvantages, while others from the same background seem to have been overwhelmed by their problems. In his book on ego psychology, Professor George Valiant of the Harvard Medical School refers to one of the subjects of this long-term study, a man Professor Valiant calls Ken. Ken faced more disadvantages than almost all of the other 450 research subjects. He was by no means gifted in any conventional sense, with no particular talent or ability, and his IQ was well below the average. Ken was born at the beginning of the Great Depression of the 1930s. His parents were divorced while he was still a baby, and Ken was to be raised by his mother. But she died of alcoholism when he was 4 years old. He was then sent to an orphanage, where he remained until he was 12. At that point, he was taken by his paternal grandparents, but his grandmother suffered from severe mental illness and was frequently in the hospital. Ken's sister also had serious psychological problems and was hospitalized for 10 years. But things did improve somewhat for Ken when he was 13, and he went to live with his father. At that point, Ken was interviewed by a social worker in connection with the research study that had been following the events of his life since his birth. Ken's answers to the interviewer's questions were really quite remarkable. Although he was well aware of the tragic things that had already befallen him, Ken found very positive things to say about his life. In particular, he focused not on the early years, but on the fact that he was now living in a household that was loving and secure. In describing Ken at the age of 13, the researcher noted his ability to see both sides of situations and sway positive elements against negative ones. This, in fact, is an extremely important characteristic of resilient people, and one that I strongly urge you to develop in yourself. People who don't achieve the success that they'd hoped for tend to see the world strictly in either-or terms. Something is either all good or all bad, And most of the time, such people see a lot more negative than positive aspects of the world. The resilient person doesn't see life through rose-colored glasses, but resilient people do have the capacity to recognize life's complexities. The highly resilient Ken had developed this ability at the young age of 13. Unfortunately, the difficulties in Ken's life didn't end with his childhood. However, he married and started a family, but his children died of a congenital blood disorder. Ken's marriage remained strong, though, and although he didn't achieve great financial success, he had a solid career in sales and marketing. When he was again interviewed for the study in late middle age, the social worker who spoke with Ken described him as warm, generous, and completely without bitterness, despite the numerous problems that he'd been called upon to overcome. The interviewer wrote, "It's almost miraculous to see a man with many deprivations almost from the beginning of his life, who has nevertheless emerged as such a picture of emotional and physical health." Again, Ken was not a genius or especially gifted in any particular area, but he did have a sense of self-sufficiency and survivorship that seemed to have become quite rare in our own time. Ken resisted the tempting role of tragic victim, although for many years nature seemed determined to cast him in that identity. His resilience, his basic sense of self-esteem, and his ability to see good in others was described by the psychologist as a kind of invincibility. As a child, his life seemed to be hopelessly broken, and his future could have been described in almost dire terms. But he was the person who had the ability to put himself back together again. This is the kind of resiliency that psychologists have referred to as the self-righting power of the human organism. Suppose you were interviewed for a research study like the one we've discussed in Hawaii. Suppose you were asked to take someone on a mental journey through the events of your past. What kind of light would you cast your life in? Would you tend to see things in strictly positive or negative categories? Or would you find that things had been more complex than that? Would you remember most people as either all good or all bad? Or would you admit that very few of us are purely saints or sinners? Most importantly, would you be able to see that you yourself are an extremely complex player in the game of life? Would you embrace the point of view that your success is defined more by strength of character and personal resilience than by arbitrary external events in terms of your power to overcome obstacles and come back strongly from setbacks? The interpretation that you give to events is really more important than the events themselves. It's true, a lot of bad things may happen to good people, but there's a great deal of evidence that your ability to find the positive needle in the negative haystack is the most important key to success. As the novelist William Faulkner once wrote, "The past certainly isn't over. In fact, it isn't even really past." What he meant, I think, is that the past never really ages. It's with us every second of every day. In fact, as we get older, it sometimes seems as if something you did years ago is more real than what you did yesterday. The great philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead once made a fascinating observation. Whitehead wrote that, from a purely logical point of view, nothing is farther in the past than anything else, although our perception of time is like a road that we travel along. It's really more like a wall directly behind us. Once something goes behind the wall, it doesn't recede any further. It's all in your mind, and it can be reinterpreted and reevaluated just like any other thought or feeling. Your willingness to look at the events from your past in new ways is absolutely essential to developing a resilient character. Everyone has or will face adversity, challenges, or obstacles. The determining factor for your success in the coming years will be what will you do when the adversity comes. Will you persist, or panic? Will you murmur or ponder? Will you look for reasons to push forward, or will you find excuses to quit and give up? Will you join in the group griping and pity parties, or will you explore the opportunity that lies within the problem? I've devoted much of my adult career studying the resilience of our returning POWs from World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. My years as a naval aviator led to lessons learned from survivors of the Holocaust and then work with astronauts. More recently, as chairman of psychology on the U.S. Olympic Committee's Sports Medicine Council, I had the unique opportunity to see the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat up front, close, and personal. All of this, combined with my work with Super Bowl and other professional sports teams, were valuable in my understanding of what it takes to overcome any obstacle to survive and thrive. When I encountered the Hawaiian study about resilience among ordinary individuals like Ken, who I mentioned earlier in this message, I felt a special kinship to him. We both were born shortly after the Great Depression, from lower-class families and broken homes. Our early lives were a series of roller coaster events, many of which were negative. I've revealed publicly that my most profitable and noteworthy work, The Psychology of Winning, was written during one of the lowest points in my life, while I was losing in nearly every aspect of my life. However, it wasn't until 3 years ago that the demand for authentic resiliency paid me a sudden, unforeseen visit. I had just returned from a month-long speaking tour throughout Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. A health checkup revealed that I had inherited a thickened heart valve condition from my mother. In my middle 80s, feeling good, I opted for a new heart valve so I could happily reach my goal of 100 golden years. Unfortunately, a surgical error severed my femoral artery, and I nearly died on the operating table. During recovery, I contracted a life-threatening infection in my new heart valve and spent 3 suspenseful months in isolated skilled nursing care. Just when I felt I had won this battle, I noticed a chronic sore throat, which was diagnosed as an acid reflux issue. Nearly a year later, a biopsy revealed I had been misdiagnosed and actually was facing advanced stage throat cancer requiring immediate, massive radiation and chemotherapy to save my life. I rarely speak about my own pain and suffering, preferring to dwell on desired outcomes. Suffice to say that it has been the most brutal, indescribable experience imaginable. Internal and external radiation burns, cognitive challenges from chemotherapy, COVID lockdowns in skilled nursing facilities, confined to a 9-by-12 room with no visitors for months, too painful to swallow, then unable to swallow, liquid diet only by feeding tube, taste buds destroyed, salivary glands inoperative, sleep deprivation, weight loss, and muscle atrophy, and then the moment of truth. Dig deeply into your resilience reservoir, Dennis, and take charge. This is no drill, it's reality. Remember, this is a cakewalk compared to what the POWs and wounded servicemen and women had endured. I converted my hospital room into an office and fitness center. Weights, stretch bands, an exercycle, desk, computer, monitor, Wi-Fi, TV off, up at 5:30 every morning, make my bed like a Navy SEAL, get rid of the hospital gown and get dressed. Stop complaining and start training. No stewing, start doing. During that 6-month period, I finished writing The New Psychology of Winning and nearly completed a draft for a second book, The Psychology of Loving. With speech therapy, I got my voice back. With swallow therapy, I learned how to swallow again. With physical therapy, I learned how to walk without a walker. Is this a miracle? Not really. Just someone being resilient when the chips are down. All those secondhand experiences in which I had marveled at the resilience of others, and not until I myself faced my own mortality did I truly practice what I so often preach. Am I cancer-free? As an optimist, I hope so. As a realist, we'll see. I know there are many keys to a life well lived, and one size does not fit all. In my heart of hearts, I believe that resilience is a fundamental measure of success and fulfillment, especially today with more real-time confrontations with the world's problems than at any previous time in history. We're inextricably connected to every other living being and creation on earth. Now let me share with you 2 exercises that will assist you in maintaining a positive and resilient perspective about the challenges you face. Both exercises focus on a bag, B-A-G. Your first bag is a bag that contains all of your challenges, problems, setbacks, obstacles, and difficulties. You'll take this bag to a large party with all of your friends and family. People from work are there and several celebrities and wealthy business people in attendance, and one by one, each person lays out on the table the contents of his or her bag, revealing his or her challenges and problems. You were then given the option of trading your bag with anyone else in the room. And if you were truly honest with yourself, I know that you would look over all the bags, even the celebrities and the wealthy people's, and then say, I'll just keep my own bag, thank you very much. You see, every life is filled with setbacks and challenges, regardless of status, wealth, or fame. In the end, we realize that our own challenges aren't so bad, and in reality, they may even look really good. The second bag is to help you focus on the things that matter most. Proper perspective and focus gives you the courage and strength to be resilient. Your bag, B-A-G, is an acronym for blessings, achievements, and goals. I recommend that you pull out your bag every 3 to 6 months. First, count your blessings. What are the things that you've been blessed with? Good health, family or friends, a roof over your head, your mind, your talents. Those are a few to begin with. Next, look at your achievements. What have you accomplished personally or professionally? Make a good lifetime list to begin with, and then add to it as you make more positive things happen. Finally, and possibly most importantly, what are your goals? The G of the bag. What are you going to accomplish in the next 3 months, 6 months, and year? Goals have an incredible influence on staying resilient. Use these 2 bags to gain perspective on where you've been, where you are, and where you want to go from here. Proper perspective will enable you to tap into your natural power of resilience in many of the difficulties and challenges we face. We don't know in the beginning if this is good or bad. If we assume it's bad, that's what usually follows. Yet if we focus on the opportunity, we usually persist and triumph. Loss often includes gain, and difficulties can provide the foundation for strength. Often the positive aspects of painful experiences are well hidden, and even looking for them may be a trying experience in itself. But if we accept the idea that resilience is the single most important quality for success, and I very strongly believe that this is true, then we must also accept the challenge of finding sources of resilience even in the worst experiences we've ever had. Ernest Hemingway wrote, "The world breaks everyone, but afterwards some people are stronger at the broken places." That's a good definition of resilience, isn't it? Learning to be stronger at the broken places. Right now, think back on the times in your life that you found the most difficult. It may be unpleasant to even remind yourself of that occasion, but I'd like you to go even further. Try to see what you gained that day, what you learned, what strength you found even in the most trying times. Perhaps you've never even been aware of what you gained until you think about it right now. The Chinese have a saying, "Eat bitter to taste sweet." It means that by living through painful times, we can become stronger people. And I certainly agree with this, and the transformation depends on our ability to discover something beyond the pain. There is one thing that I'm certain everyone can gain from the memory of a difficult time. I know that that memory can bring you a valuable sense of perspective on your current problems, and this may actually be the most important benefit of all. When you recall a moment of genuine difficulty in your life, how does this make you feel about your present situation? The memory of truly trying times in our lives can help us cope with the challenges of today. Among all of the 9 keys to unlocking your destiny in this program, the one that stands out as most critical to navigating life successfully and consistently is this key number 7, resiliency. The ability to overcome problems and setbacks that all of us encounter at different times and places during our journey.